I am minded to have today what we very recently started referring to as a Marvin Gaye-inspired programme. The question I will ask you by the time I get to the end of my interminable introduction is what's going on? What's going on? Either shortly after we came off air yesterday or while we were on air, Priti Patel denied that people in Calais were being turned away, that Ukrainians who had managed to reach Calais were being told to go back to Paris and submit a visa application from either there or Brussels. She denied it, I think, explicitly in the House of Commons. And we speculated, I don't know if you were listening, on what semantic somersaults she would be performing. So she probably meant, we suggested, that there was nobody actually there from the UK government who was telling people to turn around and go back. Fast forward a few hours, and, well, two stories emerged. One, the Daily Mirror took a photograph of the sign that is actually sort of pinned on a door in Calais, telling people, Ukrainian people desperate to get to the UK, to turn around and go back to Paris. And then a BBC correspondent in the area identified, I think, 386 individuals who had managed to get to Calais only to discover this sign, and possibly a member of staff with a box of Kit Kats. Have you seen this? A box of Kit Kats and some ready salted crisps to sort of sustain them on their journey back to Paris, where they could actually begin to apply for asylum in this country. Other journalists have identified Ukrainians in Calais explaining on tape how they will probably have to wait 10 days even to get an appointment in Paris in order to obtain one of these UK visas. 286 Ukrainians is the figure that a BBC correspondent found to have come to the UK, trying to come to the UK before being turned away at Calais, according to local officials. So that's local officials that have collated their those numbers. There is no Home Office team in Calais, though the Home Office said that there was. They have been told to go to Paris or Brussels to apply, though the Home Secretary said that they had not. And I want to know what you think is going on, because the other element of the story that almost beggars belief, and if it was anybody else in charge at this point in proceedings, it probably would beggar belief. But yesterday, Priti Patel it insisted that there would be a new route opening, and shortly afterwards Downing Street revealed that in fact there wouldn't, and the pledge to expand this visa scheme was directly contradicted by Downing Street. It's a 1,400-mile journey from Ukraine to Britain, and when you get very near the end of it, it's fewer than 20 miles left, isn't it? When you get to Calais, you receive the worst imaginable news of all, which is you're not on the list, you're not coming in. Make your way back to Paris or Brussels and apply for a visa from there. I'm not going to lie to you. There were a couple of occasions when the tales we were telling, I thought, might have become a little bit corrupted in the conveyance. I just thought that people might have got the facts slightly wrong because they were second-hand, or they might have fallen foul of the bureaucracy without necessarily accurately described. It was only a tiny, like a 5%er in the back of my mind, thinking it can't really be this bad. Why? Because we're supposed to be one of the largest economies in the world, one of the most sophisticated societies, one of the most historically respected countries on the planet. Don't come at me with your accusations of exceptionalism, or I appreciate that all of these points are debatable. But I suppose what I'm saying is I just presumed we would have the wherewithal and the appetite to do better. Even when we came off air yesterday, I still presumed that we would have the appetite and the wherewithal to get to do better. And then the stories that I've just shared with you began to unfold over the course of yesterday. And I thought back to a couple of the things we touched on together yesterday, chiefly this question about, hang on a minute, this is a country that has dedicated itself, almost all of the most powerful individuals and institutions in the British media have been dedicated for the best part of 2 decades to demonising any human being fleeing tragedy and war and hoping to come here. Political careers have been built upon it. Mountains of newspapers have been sold upon it. Hours upon hour of broadcast has been dedicated to it. there have been days over the last 10 years, in particularly the last 6 years, where I have known that when I come on air at 10 o'clock in the morning, I should be addressing the truth and reality of refugee crises and immigration in general, but I hadn't had the energy to do it as often as I should have done. I just felt like David sometimes, looking at British newspapers and seeing an army of Goliaths, just to quietly tell the truth, to quietly tell people not to be frightened, to calmly tell people not to be spooked, has over the course of the last 6 years in the British media been a very, very lonely furrow. So there should be delight and relief that some sort of oil tanker has turned around this week, that something about the plight of the Ukrainian people and the images we see of them fleeing a bloody and illegal war has activated parts of the conscience of my countrymen that I knew was there all along, that I always knew the majority of us had, and the confusion and the dismay and the disappointment at seeing so many people so easily persuaded to hate upon vulnerable human beings fleeing war hasn't been replaced by relief and delight. It's been replaced by more confusion and more disgust. And that's where Priti Patel comes in. I stress again that I am really, really not suggesting that you should feel a scintilla of sympathy for Priti Patel. I mean, categorically not. I'm pretty sure I don't need to explain that to you. There's a but coming, but it's not a very big but. But she's only done what she thought the British people wanted her to do. Right? Not just the British people, but I think most pertinently, perhaps, the parliamentary Conservative Party, the entire Conservative Party, actually, which has been, I think we could all agree, pretty comprehensively UKIPified over the last few years. She has only done what she thought they wanted her to do. I'm going to use they instead of you today. I was quite upset at the opening of yesterday's programme. I'm not more upset than I realised I was at 2 minutes past 10. By the time I got to 10 minutes after 10, I was surprised at the level of emotion I was feeling. But you look at those pictures and think back over 10 years of what my profession has done with regard to vulnerable human beings fleeing war and famine and catastrophe. And you tell me you wouldn't feel a little bit emotional, not to mention a little bit ashamed of what's been done in the name of journalism. But not you today. It's they. She's only done what she thought they wanted. Now, you can insert into that sentence your own interpretation of what they is. Is it your sort of Faragist xenophobes? Is it your rhetorical mugs who've sucked up the lines about controlling borders and all refugees being a security threat? That's still out there, that line. I don't know if you've realised that's pretty much the only justification the government has got at the moment for failing so spectacularly in its moral duties. We are still ostensibly a Christian country, so you could add in its Christian duties. Now, even allowing it to be reported that they're unhappy with Ireland for taking in so many refugees because they may be able to come from Ireland into the United Kingdom, and that is apparently a massive security threat. This is the same government, of course, or at least the same party of government that allowed 2 Russian spies to come in and attempt to murder Sergei Skripal and get out of the country again. But they're really worried about refugees. Really worried about Russians pretending to be refugees. They came in, they murdered Alexander Litvinenko, they went home, got a job as a TV host. But they want you to believe that they're really worried about people getting into Ireland and then being able to make their way into the United Kingdom. Worried enough to send 286 people back from Calais to Brussels and Paris to submit a visa application. So, what's gone wrong? I know the question I'm supposed to ask you is the Marvin Gaye one. What's going on? Actually, that's the better question, isn't it? So I want you, and forgive me for this, I want you to imagine you're Priti Patel, right? I appreciate this is quite a big ask. It's not the warmest invitation I've ever issued to you at 12 minutes after 10 on a Tuesday morning. But I want you to imagine that you're Priti Patel, okay? I want you to imagine that you've introduced legislation that makes it pretty much impossible to come here via any traditional route. Many would argue that we already live in this country in contravention of the 1951 Refugee Act. So you can't come here via routes that previous generations of refugees have managed to come here, including refugees from Idi Amin's Uganda. So that's been closed down. And she still wanted to go further. The legislation that's making its way through Parliament at the moment is designed to make you a criminal if you successfully get here. I think I've understood it correctly, but I still have that 5% going, it can't really be that bad. We haven't come this low, have we? We haven't turned into these people. But even if you manage to get here in a dinghy or on a floating door or whatever it may be, strapped to a drone making your way across from Calais, if you manage to get here, wherever you are fleeing, whether it's Afghanistan, Syria or Ukraine, Yemen or anywhere else in the world, if you actually manage to get here via that sort of route, Priti Patel wants you to be a criminal straight away, and the Conservative Party is going along with it. They're voting it through Parliament. So, given... And I'm going to one you now instead of a they, but unless you didn't understand what was being done in your name by this Home Secretary and this government, I don't get how you think you're allowed to get cross and upset about what's been done this week. They literally want to make every refugee... They want to almost ban the concept of being a refugee in the United Kingdom. And they're doing it for political reasons. They're doing it because they thought that's what they wanted. Conservative voters, Brexit voters, I don't know what you want to call them. Let's just say the disciples of the Daily Mail and the Daily Express and the Daily Telegraph, the disciples of the rent-a-gob right-wing commentators who'll pop up on any television programme that asks them to insist that we must control our borders and, it's the National Health Service, not the International Health Service, and wages are being driven down by people, all of that, years of it. The conflation, the deliberate conflation of European Union citizens using freedom of movement in order to come here under the same freedoms that would allow us to go there, conflating that with people fleeing war. All of that. So Priti Patel has done what she thinks voters asked her to do. She's taken the hostile environment and she's times it by 10,000. And no one criticised her for it within her own party, or next to nobody. All of these Tory MPs now popping up on the telly going, we must do more, we must do more. What the hell were they thinking was going to happen when Priti Patel was introducing this sort of legislation? Where were they? They weren't even sitting on their hands, they were sticking their arms in the air to vote it through. House of Lords has succeeded, probably temporarily, in sticking a couple of brakes on the progress of these bills, but they are the platform upon which Priti Patel's entire political edifice is built. Be as horrible as you can to desperate people trying to come here. Keep them out. Lock the door. Pull up the drawbridge. It's what they told her. Nearly said you again, but obviously that's not fair. It's what voters told her. It's what Daily Express readers told her. It's what Daily Mail editorials told her. It's what the Daily Telegraph told her. It's what Spectator columnists told her. They all told her that this is what we wanted. This is what was desired. This is what was, even because they're so morally corrupt, these people, this was what was needed. So she's done it. And now we're seeing the consequences of what she thinks we wanted her to do. So what's happened? What's going on? 0345 6060 973. A Home Secretary with, and I hate to say this because it's true, a Home Secretary with huge amounts of reason to believe that the British people wanted this sort of refugee policy in place is now being castigated for delivering it. Do you want to have a crack at unravelling that? Because I can't. 0345 6060 973. She has done exactly what voters desired her to do. She's treated foreign people like scum. She's made it almost impossible to come into this country, regardless of where you're fleeing from or how acute and clear your need and your qualification is to be offered refuge and sanctuary. She has done exactly what she was asked to do by pretty much every right-wing commentator and columnist that you can think of. And now she's getting a kicking for it. Just explain that to me, please. That's all. You don't even have to pick a side. But all that Priti Patel has done is what was asked of her by the post-Brexit electorate. So how come they, or you, now get to turn around and say, oh no, I didn't mean it like that. I didn't mean them. The Home Secretary has created an environment that makes it almost impossible for refugees to get here, because that is what pretty much every newspaper in the country wanted her to do, and successive election results suggested that the voters wanted her to do, and now she's getting a kicking for it. Why? 0345 6060 973. Sam's in Enfield. Sam, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello, Sam.
I'm 55, James, and I came to this country when I was 5 from a place called Uganda, Kampala.
Okay.
And it's the 50th anniversary of these Ugandan Asians coming to the UK. So this hits quite hard and home to me. You know what's going on. I can remember the same kind of thing happening to my family. And what's interesting...
Well, I'm not correcting you, but it was easier for Ugandan Asians to get here in the tens of thousands than it was for, I think, currently 300 Ukrainians who've had their visa...
Yeah, it was superbly organised.
Yes.
It was smooth. But one thing that happened was that I remember going to Entebbe Airport, holding my mum's hand, and just boarding a random plane and not knowing where it was going to.
God.
And some of my family ended up in Canada. Some of them ended up in Sweden, in Australia, all over the world. The families were split up, and we went because it was too dangerous to stay where we were. But it was very well organised by the Brits.
Yeah.
And that's one very telling thing. But what's also very telling is I'm brown and I'm a Muslim.
Right.
And when I turn the TV screen on, I see the whole of Europe having welcoming arms for these refugees, and they're very deserving, especially given what's going on. But I really contrast how we've reacted to Syrians or Afghanis, right, who are going through the same kind of nonsense. And how suddenly, we've got room and we've got open arms for these people to come.
No, I mean, you're right that the public opinion is a lot warmer towards Ukrainians than it was to Afghans or Syrians. But why is the government still adopting the policies that were forged in the xenophobia and the callousness that you describe?
So I think that secretly they still do not want these people to come. And yet they can see the opinion of the British public saying, "Let them come. They're welcome to come." So I think what they're doing is they're creating a facade, to say thousands of people are eligible and they can come, and then making it so incredibly difficult for them to come that in reality they will probably elect to go to Germany or France or wherever they're actually more welcome. Where those countries that have just said, look, you can board a train and you can use your Ukrainian passport for the ticket.
Yes, and you can work as well. You can find work and we'll help you.
Exactly, you can work.
Get settled. What about the blatant lies then? Do they then become an inevitable upshot of the contradiction that you describe? Because if this is a deliberate deception that they're visiting upon the British people by saying all the words designed to make us think, and a few people will fall for it, whether or not it's enough people, I don't know. Yeah. But it leaves such a chasm of truth at the heart of this government that Priti Patel announces something at 10 o'clock in the morning and it gets shot down in flames by Downing Street at 11 o'clock in the morning. She says nobody is being turned away in Calais. Journalists in Calais are literally talking to people on camera who are being forced to go back to Paris, compelled to go back to Paris. So if it fits, doesn't it? The deliberate deception means that the next stage has to be denying objective reality.
So here's the kicker, which is I think they still believe that the silent majority of the British public do not want people to come. But it's not. It's something that's best unsaid right now. Those people
but the percentages in the polling. I'll find you a couple now. I'll just have a little scroll through my inbox and I'll find you a couple. But the percentages in the polling give the lie to that. So they're just thinking people will soon get them back, chomping at the bit about people they've never met. This is just a temporary aberration in the very carefully cultivated British attitude to refugees. And once Mr. Murdoch and the Daily Mail get back on side, they'll be screaming for blood from the White Cliffs of Dover before you can say Nigel Farage's Fisher-Price binoculars. And
here's another really interesting thing. So I've got family all over Europe from this 1972 Uganda incident.
Of course.
And virtually to a man, they're advising people, do not go to the UK.
So
You'll be more welcome in Sweden,
so
in Denmark.
Here's one. So here's Mike. Here we go again. O'Brien's left-wing soapbox. I tell you what, James, come down to the south coast. Watch all those wonderful refugees you love so much. Watch all the shoplifting, the theft, the abuse of women, the attacks on locals. So Priti Patel's calculation is that there are a lot more Mikes out there than they currently are stupid enough to publicly advertise. Well, thank you to Mike, though, for being stupid enough.
And here's the other thing. Priti Patel's background is Ugandan, right?
Of course it is.
So
and although her parents were not actually refugees, they could certainly be described as having come here in pursuit of a better life than they would have had in Uganda. And her dad ends up as a UKIP candidate. Now, some apples do fall far from the tree, but that one doesn't seem to have done. And one more for you. Just listen to James for over 10 minutes, very good at criticising the current situation, but not offered any alternative, says Mark in Fareham, who apparently is not aware of every other country in Europe offering up a Technicolor alternative, most obviously the Republic of Ireland, which has not only taken in already well over 1,000 people, but is now being criticised by British ministers for possibly opening a security risk for refugees who might make their way from Ireland into the United Kingdom. Mark, give your head a wobble, mate. There are 28, 29, 30 obvious alternatives unfolding under your very eyes, if you would only look at them.
Here's the thing. Those guys that went to Salisbury to do their tour, They didn't come in on a visa. They boarded a plane with fake passports and whatever they needed to do, right? They don't. These
if
people
the Russians want to send people here who wish us ill, they do not need to come in pretending to be Ukrainian refugees. Obviously, an important point that you make, and of course, it's largely women and children because men of fighting age are staying in Ukraine. So the old lie about no, we can't let them in because they're all men. Well, now it's women and children. We can't let them in either. Security risk. But you said that we couldn't let men in because they were a security risk and women and children wouldn't be. Yeah, but there's Mike and Mark in Fareham with their yeah, but. I just hate foreigners, mate, and I haven't quite got the guts to say it out loud yet. And that is what Priti Patel is banking on. And this is the point of today's phone-in. That is pretty much what the last 3 ballots in this country and almost all of the right-wing media have been telling her. Look, they just hate foreigners. They just hate foreigners. So build your refugee and asylum policy around the simple fact that they just hate foreigners. Question, what's gone wrong? Question, what's going on? 03456060973. Thank you, Sam. Neil's in Alton in Staffordshire. Neil, what's going on?
Good morning, James.
Hello, mate.
Good to speak to you. James, I was just listening to the last call there, and I think they very eloquently kind of summed up the situation, really.
So they're banking on the nativist, racist rump just being temporarily quiet, and they'll come barking back any minute now, and Priti Patel's policies will look like vote winners.
Well, yeah, I wouldn't be as brutal to say that it's... Yes, there is definitely a racist rump in society. We can see that. I think, though, with a very large percentage, though, I think it's an unconscious bias.
Go on.
I think that the people that we're seeing in this conflict in Eastern Europe look like us, they sound like us.
This is obviously true, and it's obviously a big part of it. But it's not that long ago Farage was wanging on about Romanians, or that Poles were getting beaten up in the street. So it doesn't fit completely, does it? Because the racism can be easily activated against Eastern European white people.
It can. And I think what the government are doing is blatant populism. They're sensing the public mood.
It's unpopular populism.
And it's to do with the fact that, you know, this is a completely unjust war. It's an unjust invasion of Ukraine. Everybody can see the injustice of that. And I think there's a massive movement, public mood that's sympathetic to that. And I can see the real risk to other countries and NATO countries. And I think there's a lot of self-protectionism mixed in with that.
But except that, again, there's a lovely bird tweeting in the background. You've taken me right up to the news. Again, the opinion polling is going up. The number of people, including 58% of actual Conservative voters. So she's not even feeding them what she thought they wanted. And I don't understand. I do completely understand the argument that lots of you are pointing out, that Ukrainians look more like us than Syrians do. But it can't just be that. It can't just be that, because, as I've pointed out, it was Romanians and Poles that you were being instructed to hate by your daily newspapers just, 6 years ago? So they could do that if they wanted to. So what's changed? What's going on? What's happened? Why is it so hard for people who wanted this to acknowledge that this is what they wanted? What don't they understand about the direction of traffic over the last few years. One prominent right-wing columnist asking why don't we have a visa application centre in Calais? Why do these people have to go back to Paris? And the short answer is because this is what you asked for. This is what you wanted. This is not only what you voted for, but if you work for a newspaper like the Daily Mail, this is exactly what you've been calling for as long as I can remember reading it. What is going on? Because you can say to me, oh, well, the reason why public opinion is different, James, or the reason even why some media members are responding differently is because Ukrainians are a little bit more like us than perhaps Syrians are or Afghans are. But rules apply to everybody. So how could anybody possessed of a functioning brain not understand that if you introduce rules designed for refugees fleeing Syria, the same rules will apply to refugees fleeing Ukraine? So what Priti Patel is in the process of setting up in an incredibly cack-handed and confused fashion, so cack-handed and confused that even yesterday, one of her announcements was contradicted by Downing Street within 2 hours of the announcement being made. They're now boasting about being the first country in the world to open up a visa scheme without mentioning that 30 countries, our nearest neighbours, haven't got visa schemes per se because they've waived the need for visas. I mean, I know it's an overused word. This is Orwellian. Now, this bit is Orwellian. Look at us, we're setting up a brilliant visa scheme. We're the best. We're the first in the world. And then James cleverly yesterday saying, I don't think we should be comparing ourselves to other countries or making claims about being world-beating. It's a team sport. And then, of course, completely ignoring the fact that even our nearest neighbours, plural, Ireland and France, have gone a way further than we have. How can we boast about setting up a visa scheme that is demonstrably irrefutably inferior to the system being deployed in every other country in Europe? 0345 606 0973. And it's a genuine question. There must be something else going on, because it's not just about Ukrainians looking whiter than Syrians do or Afghans do. It's about the people who called for these rules being what? Too thick to realise that they would have to apply to everybody? Too callous to realise that they would have to apply to everybody? Or to something else? I don't get it. I know these people. I work sometimes alongside them. And I don't understand how anyone could have missed the fact that what you weaponised against Syrians, what you weaponised against Afghans, would remain a weapon when Ukrainians needed help, needed support. Where does the confusion come from? What, as the great Marvin Gaye famously inquired, what's going on? Alex is in Bracknell. Alex, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello, Alex.
Sorry, I'm a bit nervous. First-time caller.
It's only me.
Just wanted to give you my experience for the last couple of days from the visa scheme for the Ukrainian people.
Yes.
So my wife is Ukrainian,
right,
from close to Odessa. Her family is all there. So in the last 3 days, I must have spent best time of 10 hours filling in forms, paperwork.
Yeah.
For them to go to the British Embassy in Sofia.
In Bulgaria?
In Bulgaria, yeah.
Right.
To apply for the visa. The earliest appointment I got last night at 10 o'clock, the earliest appointment for them is the 29th of March, 3 weeks from now.
And that involves them getting to Bulgaria, getting to Sofia in the first place. Is that an easy journey?
It's not. My wife just rang about half an hour ago. She's spoken to her mom, and there are no buses, nothing. So I said to her, we might need to get a taxi.
Yes.
I don't know, from Ukraine to Moldova, then from Moldova to Bulgaria. It's just a nightmare.
I mean, so when I'm looking for silver linings, Alex. So when they get there, the application process should be relatively straightforward, but it's taken you the best part of 10 hours to fill in the forms.
Correct.
And those forms being effective hinges upon your wife's family getting all the way from Odessa to Sofia. And Odessa,
correct.
I read today, Odessa, they are now talking in terms that they never thought they would be talking about, the prospects of Russian attacks on Odessa.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. I mean, what I could understand completing those forms, James, is you got the main applicant.
Yes.
And then you need to put all the people that are coming with them to UK. And then you need to do the same thing for because there are 5 of them. So each applicant has to put the same information for them. So, for example, my mother-in-law is going to be the first applicant, then my sister-in-law and my nephews, you have to put them in the information. So then you have to do a second application form, let's say for my sister-in-law, but I have to put my mother-in-law's information and my nephew's information again in the same application. Then my nephews, same. I found it so difficult, unbelievable.
Do you have to pay?
No, we don't. No,
so that's the difference between the normal system. That's one of the differences between the normal system. The height of the walls that you have to climb over been lowered slightly because the financial requirement isn't there. Although we spoke yesterday, of course, to a chap whose wife is applying for settled status, and that involves regular payments for things like NHS access and other issues. But that's going to be a long way from your worries at the moment. What do you think is going to happen? How do you think this is going to unfold for your family?
I mean, as soon as they can get to Bulgaria, the better. I mean, we are ready to pay for private accommodation there, just for them to be there for the 29th of March to go to the embassy and see what's going to happen.
And when might they leave Odessa then? Soon, or will they wait till closer to the 29th? It's only the 8th today.
The sooner the better, because there are no buses or anything, so the sooner they leave the better.
So there's a financial requirement there anyway, so unless they're going to sleep on park benches or things like that, people who can afford to find some accommodation when they get to Sofia are going to be in a much better situation than people who can't.
I mean,
and that's the definition of a refugee, isn't it? Someone who needs shelter, someone who needs looking after.
The good thing is I've got cousins in Sofia, so they can provide me with accommodation, but that's not the point. I mean, 29, 3 weeks, James.
Yeah, I know.
It's too long.
Well, they're surging it. That must be a great comfort to your wife.
Yeah.
To hear Priti Patel say that they're surging it. You don't have to answer this question, Alex, if you don't want to, and I mean that most sincerely. How do you account for this when you look at what every other country in Europe is doing for people like your wife's family, and then you look at what your home country is doing? How do you make sense of it? What do you think the rationale is? What's the reasoning here?
I don't make any sense.
No.
I mean, we've lived here for 22 years. We've been working for 22 years. We've been paying taxes for 22 years. I've got a 4-bedroom house in Bracknell, so the accommodation is not a problem. They can come and they can stay with me, but just bring them over. We're not asking for anything. Just bring them over to safety. My brother-in-law, who is 30, he has to stay there.
Yes, I know.
He has to stay there. So the rest of the family, I mean, just bring them over. So as I said, we're not asking for any help.
Just the freedom to help your own family, to help your own loved ones. I mean, to be honest, I understand why you make that point, but I think the majority of the British people would be happy to see Ukrainian people come here, even if they didn't have a brother-in-law or a sister ready to help, standing by to throw open their doors. And there's the question, in many ways, the question that underpins today's programme. Why are they doing it like this? A few of you pointing out that Marvin Gaye's What's Going On is much more of a statement than a question. I take your point, but it seems unduly pedantic in the current climate. When you deal with what Alex's people are dealing with, the question is why? Why is it so hard? Answer, this is what it was designed to do. Question, why didn't people who wanted it realise what would happen? And that is a question I would love you to answer, if you can. Maybe I'm talking about you. Maybe you didn't realise when you were cheering for these people and waving your little flags and putting your little bulldog avatars on your Twitter accounts. You didn't realise that this would mean that we would be the shame of Europe. We would be not just the sick man of Europe, but sick in the other sense of the word. Actually, appalling behaviour. Is it too hard now, do you think, to take responsibility for it, for people, for those people? So, well, I mean, I may have voted for it, God bless Nigel, give him a seat in the House of Lords, but I didn't realise this was going to happen. What did you think was going to happen? All the warnings about Russia, even if you want to bring it back to Brexit, when people talked about how European security would be threatened by any weakening of union, any weakening of unity. Johnson was the one who misrepresented what David Cameron has said and pretended that he talked about World War III. It was Johnson literally poo-pooing the idea of World War III. You're not going to get causation necessarily from correlation, but it's a massive flipping coincidence, isn't it? That here we are looking at what we're looking at. Within 6 years of that thing we did that everybody said wouldn't threaten peace in Europe? Don't be stupid. Those days are behind us. It's incredible. But forget about that for now. It's too soon, probably, to allow that penny to drop. Look exclusively at refugees. You got what you wanted. They got what they wanted, and they're complaining. Do you want to have a crack at explaining that, either from the inside of that mindset or, like me, from the puzzled outside? Andy Lyons is the chief reporter for the Daily Mirror. He's currently in Calais. Well, you'll remember yesterday, Priti Patel denied any Ukrainian people were essentially being sent back to Paris or to Brussels to make their application. So we'll begin, if we may, Andy, by asking if you recognise the reality that Priti Patel described yesterday.
Well, I've seen there's about 150 families staying at this youth hostel here, and they've all been told they can't get visas in Calais at the moment. Several of them are trying to get to Paris or Brussels, but there doesn't appear to be any visible British presence on the ground here. Nobody I've seen in the last 36 hours, anyway.
You didn't see anybody yesterday either?
I didn't see anybody yesterday.
I know you took, or your colleague Charlie Varley took a photograph of the note on the door. What's it on the door of? This fill in the online form and make your way to Paris sign.
Yeah, they've got a sort of notice board at the start of the opening entrance of this youth hostel.
Right.
To be fair, I don't know who put that sign up there.
Oh, okay.
But clearly, it's just a straightforward sign because there's a British charity here called Care for Calais.
Yes.
And they've been helping, but I've not seen a single British government official here at all in Calais in the last 36 hours.
Good grief. Tell me the tale, if you would, Andy, of Vitaly Turetska and his family.
Well, he's a London builder, works legally in London. He lives in Wembley. He drove to the Ukraine-Romania border to get his wife and two boys, 6 and 2, once the bombing started. He then drove them back here, assumed because that's his wife and his 2 young children, he would be able to get over. And he was told, you can come in, but they can't at the moment. You have to have proper paperwork, and at the moment they are staying in that hostel and desperate to get over. But at the moment they are stranded in Calais.
Where are they given that message specifically? Sorry if that's a silly question, but I think a lot of my listeners will be interested to know. Can they? Because there's 2 customs posts in Calais, isn't there? There's the French one and then there's the British one.
Yeah, but I don't think it's more customs. I mean, they've gone to this youth hostel and they're getting all that information from there. The Calais mayor has set that up to allow 150 Ukrainian families there. They're obviously swapping information. There's a sign on the door that says, you can't get visas here. He said he tried to get across and was told he couldn't. This was several days ago, so when he initially tried. So he's been here for several days now.
Just hoping that the rules change? Hoping that
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously once the system kicks in, hopefully, as someone with him, a wife and 2 children of that age, will come over quite quickly.
Well, where does that optimism come from, though? Because there's nothing in the pipeline at the moment that wouldn't involve having to go back to Paris or make his way to Brussels to apply from there. As far as I can tell, I could be wrong, but any suggestion from Priti Patel yesterday that there was going to be a new route opened up got shot down by Downing Street 2 hours later. I guess it could be resurrected again, given the way this lot operate. Just because they said it's not going to happen doesn't mean it definitely isn't going to happen. But where is his optimism coming from, Andy?
Well, he just wants to get back. He's obviously legally allowed to go into Britain. They just at some stage in the coming days that it will open up. Yeah, but I mean there's something rumours flying around that there's some sort of processing centre is going to be set up en route to Calais, but I haven't been able to find it yet. And details on that seem pretty scant at the moment.
And the 2 little boys on the front of your newspaper today, they're Vitaly's 2 sons, are they?
Children, yeah. And
Sorry,
one of
son
them's
and daughter.
quite distraught and upset. No, 2 sons.
Okay.
One's quite distraught and upset. The other one's actually made a few mates because there's like table football and things like that there. So obviously the kid's being resilient. So he's not so bad, but it's still pretty distressing situation.
1,000 miles.
And that's just one family, and there are dozens of them in a similar situation.
And they're all sitting tight, hoping for a change, or they're going to have to set their sights on Paris and make their way there.
I think they're just waiting for more proper concrete information. I mean, it's just a holding game at the moment, and they're just sitting there, obviously getting fed in the clothes and being treated very well by the French authorities. But at the moment, they're just in a holding pattern.
Any reports, or I probably not best to avoid rumours, but any reports of Ukrainian people making their way into the sort of camps at Calais that we've heard so much about? I know they're much reduced.
No, I mean the camp. I've had a drive around this morning. The camps are still there, and it's bitterly cold here in Calais. But the Ukrainian families all seem to be being housed in this youth hostel, which is literally, I don't know, perhaps six. There's a ferry coming in now as I speak. It's that close. Yeah, it's probably 600 metres from the ferry port and 100 metres from the beach. But they're all in there, and they're in warm accommodation, and they appear to be. I haven't heard any stories of Ukrainian families out in the camps or anything.
Good. Andy Lyons, chief reporter for the Daily Mirror, and I urge you to have a look at that newspaper today. It pulls no punches, also going in very hard on the companies, including McDonald's, facing growing fury for continuing to operate in Russia. We may get onto that story or that element of the story a little later in the programme, but for the time being we remain with this very British mystery of why so many people have been taken by surprise by the refugee policies that this government has largely been boasting about for the last 2 years. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. And we said earlier in the week, didn't we, soldiers, sanctions, refugees. It's not quite soldiers, because soldiers, apart from how the military engagements are unfolding in Ukraine, in the context of what the West in general, or the UK in particular, can do, it's arms, sanctions, refugees. And I think Ian Dunt has broken it down rather well. He says on arms, we've done really well. And he's right, sending the early, they call them defensive offensive weapons or offensive defensive weapons. I can't remember which way round it was. But Ben Wallace was ahead of the curve of that, a little bit ahead of the game. Sanctions, we're a disgrace, an absolute disgrace. But compared to our response on refugees, our sanctions regime looks like a gold medal winner. That's how bad it is. 10:55 is the time. Mike is in Sunderland. Mike, what would you like to say?
Hi, good morning. I'm sorry I can't give you an answer to your conundrum pretty Patel, but I just think that most people, well, I live in Sunderland, and you know what Sunderland's history is with the Brexit referendum.
Yes, of course, yes.
And I was trying to convince people, not to do it. Anyway,
it's a lonely furrow. It's a lonely furrow,
I just think, James, that people just didn't know what they were voting for. They just swallowed the lies.
Well, maybe, I'm not going to go pot kettle on you and steer you back from Brexit. But the issue of the refugee policy, which wasn't in the referendum, obviously refugees or immigration in general was weaponised, and Farage's poster, the Breaking Point poster, of course, literally featured refugees. So anyone pretending that they didn't know what was going on, I'm afraid, is lying to themselves again. But I mean, where are you now when you try and work out why people are being surprised by what is happening? What's the kindest thing you can say about them?
Yeah, well, the reason I called is because my wife and I are both 71. All our family have flown the nest. We've got a little bit. We've got room in our house, and I've looked online and tried to see if there's anywhere that we can. And we would take in a small family, and then we would keep them, for a reasonable length of time, and it wouldn't cost the state anything at all. And there's no flipping way on earth that's going to happen, is it?
I don't think that kindness, that decency is recognised at the moment by Home Office policy. I think that we've spoken to a lot of family members, so they have to provide various assurances and logistical promises or pledges, and then there an opportunity that isn't up and running yet for businesses or others to sponsor. You might be able to do something under that, but no, as it stands, this is the only country in Europe where you watch these scenes unfold on television. You read about these two little boys on the front of the Daily Mirror. You read about children being murdered by Russian soldiers, and you want to help the people fleeing. But the United Kingdom is the only country in Europe where you can't. And I hate to return to this point, but this is what people wanted, or at least this is what they thought they wanted. How did that happen? And how can they be surprised now that they've got it? We don't want to help. Remember when Angela Merkel took in, what was it? I think it ended up being about 1.6 million Syrians fleeing war. That was supposed to be the end of Germany as we know it. That was supposed to be the yet another brick in the wall of European Union collapse. Who told you that? Precisely the same people that told you to vote for that thing and that man. So how come? How come people have the effrontery, the gall to complain about what they called for years unfolding in front of them in real time and in glorious technicolor? I genuinely don't get it. I saw one prominent journalist yesterday. It was in response to an LBC tweet of one of my clips saying, well, the people it's perfectly easy for them to get in illegally on boats. And the level of boneheadedness that you would need to hold that position genuinely mystifies me. Because the only reason people get into dinghies in Dover is because all of the normal, traditional routes of refuge have been closed and criminalised. And the reason why Ukrainian people can't come here at all, unless they get into one of these dinghies, which please God they won't do and won't have to do, is because this government has closed all the, quotes, legal, end quotes, routes. It's like watching somebody trying to do a Rubik's Cube with oven gloves on. It's so obvious why what is happening, and it's so obvious that until about a fortnight ago, people were boasting about loving it and having voted for it. Now you're actually seeing it unfold in real time and glorious technicolor, and you're complaining. How bloody dare you? Seriously, you did this. I mean they did this, not you, them. I guess, I don't know quite what you'd call it. What is it? The need not to acknowledge reality is strong in so many, including in this industry, in this profession. You could not look at the British media over the last 10 years without concluding that an appetite for reneging on any responsibilities we might have to refugees had become politically opportunistic. It had become politically powerful. Whether or not you trace it back to letting deeply immoral and disgusting people into the public space because you got a few clicks on Question Time, or you managed to get a bit of a heated debate going on your TV programs, whether it runs deeper and we've simply reignited ancient hatreds, or whether there's something particularly specific to the current climate, whether the people who wanted to achieve Brexit for reasons that still remain largely unclear. Poor old Jacob Rees-Mogg reduced to asking readers of The Sun to come up with good ideas as to why they did that thing 6 years ago. But maybe there was a desperate need among those people to get it over the line, and so they reignited the ancient hatreds, the kind of attitudes that in 1938 saw the Daily Mail complaining about German Jews flooding into this country. So how come there's been this weird U-turn, this weird about turn? What do you think explains it, and how? And that sound a little bit over the top, but I don't think it is. I mean, how dare people who called for this, politicians and pundits particularly, how dare they turn around and complain now about Priti Patel doing exactly what they all demanded she do? That's the bit I can't unravel. I probably never will. But it's almost therapeutic sometimes to ask these questions and collect answers, even though none of them will be wholly satisfactory. How can these people complain about Priti Patel's refugee policy doing exactly what they demanded it do? No wonder Farage is trying to draw attention to himself by talking about net zero environment policies. If you bore personal responsibility for the weaponization of refugees in this country to the most ludicrous extreme, you'd probably rather talk about windmills, wouldn't you? Or fracking. But here we are. She's done what you wanted and you hate it. I don't get it. Sorry. She's done what they wanted and they hate it. We don't get it. 0345 606 0973. Anthony's in Orpington. Anthony, what would you like to say?
Yeah, hi, James. Enjoying the show, mate. Really, really lovely.
Thank you.
And I want to focus on the point in part of when you were sort of just going through your own mental gymnastics to try to understand it. And you touched on the shame. And that's the angle that I think I'm coming from, is that there is a shame. We, the United Kingdom, have had a rich history of treating migrants really, really well. And then it all changed.
I don't know that that's true, you know, actually.
Yeah, well, I'm talking about pre-war when we had the Kinder, you know what I mean?
That was 10,000 kids who had to leave their families behind and only came here after enormous pressure was brought to bear on the government, and Jewish families and non-Jewish families were found who'd promised to put these children up at their own expense and cost.
Yeah, yeah.
I think, and this is only the last 24 hours for me, reading around and looking into some of these things, because I like to believe that we have a long, proud history of offering, but we don't.
Well,
sorry, pal.
Let's imagine that we did. In this imaginary world, let's imagine that at one point in time we did.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well,
this is 'cause otherwise.
Maybe the Huguenots. Maybe when the Huguenots were invited over from fleeing from.
I sort of look at it from sort of post-war when we got Enoch Powell and he was Labour Secretary. coming all from the Commonwealth, help us rebuild the country. And then, 10 years later, he gives the river of blood. And that's where, to me, you can start tracking where we start weaponizing migration.
Yeah, okay.
Obviously, these are big leaps. You've got Thatcher and the sort of changes to the Nationality Act. Obviously, May, where you had a
hostile environment.
Society.
Yes.
Yeah, there you go. And then we had, what was one of the main reasons with regard to Brexit? We were saying that we
Take
can
back
control immigration over there, other world, but we can't control EU migration.
Yeah.
But when we leave, we can then control. And I think you did a wonderful on your show a little while ago when you exposed that actually we had all the laws when we were members of the EU to really make changes to migration pertaining to EU citizens if we wanted to, across successive governments, but we chose not to.
And now we know why we chose not to, because it leaves enormous holes in so many areas of our infrastructure and our public and private services.
Exactly. But then in terms of the shame then, so we've got all this, and then I think there was a lovely bit a little while ago where you said, if we look at how sections of our press have really denigrated migrations and really denigrated the EU, it's amazing that we actually ever got sort of 48-52.
Yeah, no, I've thought that before. So let me steer you back to shame. Why is it so hard for people to climb down? They've got what they wanted.
Yes, section of the community wanted this, right? This whole thing about Calais. We never wanted migrants to go to Calais because we used to call it the jungle. So why would we set up camps and reception centres in Calais when we were dealing with immigration from over there? Yeah. We never wanted migrants in Calais. We wanted it to be tough. We wanted it to be brutal. Remember, a little while ago, there was discussions about shooting dinghies or getting the Royal Navy to push them back.
The wave machines as well. Priti Patel's trademark wave machines.
Yeah. Exactly.
What's happened to that bloke that she appointed? Isn't she appointed an old sailor to be in charge of repelling people in the? I wonder what happened.
Something like that.
Wonder what happened to him.
And then you get so when we want this brutal, harsh, hostile system, the shame comes into it because we're now outside the EU. It's our sovereignty. It's our laws. We can make them. But all of a sudden, we get this war, which is, just around the corner from us.
Yes.
And the world is now watching. Because this is by design. But the world is now watching. And it's, oh my gosh. Oh, I didn't...
But it's still quite far away. I mean,
it's on the public stage.
Yeah, it's still far away. It's still... I mean, what is it? Because I'm very bad. I've been a rubbish news editor.
When I say far away, I'm talking about Europe as our neighbours, as opposed to those faraway lands across the ocean in Syria, West Africa.
I don't think your average Joe feels that way about Ukraine. They didn't when Yanukovych was slung out.
But the embarrassment and the shame is because it is so close. It's embarrassing and it's shameful.
And because of the echoes of the 1940s and the tidal wave of humanity that had to flee the Nazis. Does stand comparison with this tidal wave of humanity fleeing Putin, and we are sitting on our hands and twiddling our thumbs and telling lies. Even if you wanted to defend it, and I know you wouldn't, and I doubt anyone who's prepared to ring me these days would, but even if you wanted to defend it, how do you square the lies? So you love this. It's great, screw them all. I don't want any Ukrainians coming into this country, but why are they lying about doing more than they're actually doing then?
Because they're embarrassed. They're embarrassed.
Yeah.
So you have to, because we look at our partners and their immigration policies and their reception is coming from a place of compassion. Ours is coming from a place of callousness.
And compulsion.
And that is why
it's coming from a place of compulsion. When they do the right thing, they're doing it because of public opinion, and public opinion exists despite 3 decades of grooming.
Compulsion and callousness.
It is, isn't it?
That's where it's coming from. Compulsion and callousness. Which is why, when I look at, like most of your callers, look at the TVs, I see the reception centres in Poland, I see reception centres in other parts of Europe. They've got blankets, they've got soup kitchens, they've got food, they're doing, omelettes or, what's the other thing, pancakes. What do we rock up with? One geezer, you say, a packet of crisps and some chewing gum. On your bike, off you go, John.
Kit Kats,
we're not doing the visas there. You've got to go 6-hour journey, I'm hearing.
It is indefensible, isn't it? I mean, they talk about having too many civil servants. You'd think they'd be able to find 30 to go and sit in a porter cabin in Calais and process these things in person.
No, But
so
it's
why
like you
not?
said, James, we
but
don't
why?
want them in Calais. The system is designed to be harsh, and this is what a harsh system looks like.
There it is.
This is this harsh system looks like.
There's
we
no
don't
getting
want them
away
in
from
Calais.
it. There's no getting away from it. And then you lead me back to the question that's underpinned the whole programme this morning, which is why are people complaining about seeing in action exactly what they said they wanted?
Because the brutality hoisted upon innocent humanity becomes shameful to witness on the world stage.
But
That's
there's also the narrative of the lies about refugees, isn't there? So,
Yes.
so it's also impossible
Yeah.
to look at the scenes in Ukraine and pretend that you believe these people aren't in good faith or that they're not real refugees, whereas Syria is sufficiently far away and the geopolitics of it sufficiently complicated, and the fact that the demographics are so different, young men needing to get out of Syria because otherwise they'd be conscripted into Bashar al-Assad's army or forced to fight for ISIS, whereas their mothers and their sisters and their daughters wouldn't be. So a completely different demographic feeding into what is just hate-filled lies, always at every turn. I keep looking for more complicated answers, more complicated explanations, more sympathetic and sophisticated rationales, but then look at the faces of the people who punt this stuff. You know what they are. I know what they are. The people of Lincolnshire have done their bit. We shouldn't be taking any more. And he got knighted for services to the Conservative Party. This is what they've built. And they've built it because they were told to, by newspapers and then by voters, because you never would have got the British public to be in favour of this sort of horror show if it wasn't for the newspapers leading the way. And there it is. There it is. Does anyone know what did happen to that bloke that she hired to deal with these problems? And what the hell happens if, God forbid, any poor Ukrainians do decide to take their chances in a rickety dinghy? They'll be immediately criminalised, as would the people traffickers into whose clutches they might fall the longer they're stuck in Calais with no support except an instruction to make your own way back to Paris. But this is what they wanted. That's a bit that I don't get. This is what Priti Patel was charged with delivering. It's what she boasted at conference about having done. We're going to make it almost impossible for any refugee to come here at all. And the newspapers that did the grooming, the newspapers that did the gaslighting, the commentators and the columnists that rolled out these attitudes and carefully cultivated and manipulated previously decent people into believing that they were under threat or that this couldn't be afforded or that we couldn't do this and we couldn't do that and we shouldn't do this and we shouldn't do that. Today, they're telling you that Priti Patel isn't doing enough. They're telling you that this is disgraceful. How does that work? How does that work? Give it 10 minutes and they'll be complaining about the fact that the European Union doesn't have an army. Here is a thought that hadn't occurred to me, and my thanks to John for citing it. Can they set up a visa processing centre in Calais? Because what would happen? How would they keep out Afghan and Syrian refugees who are currently sleeping in tents in freezing conditions? I'm thinking out loud now. There may be an obvious answer to this question. How could they do that? Would they have to have security guards keeping all the brown faces out of the building while white faces could go in? Seen terrible racism on the border of Ukraine. Would they have to enact something similar in order to open a visa processing centre in Calais? I honestly don't know, but it's a question that someone's going to need to answer. Why can't we open a visa processing centre in Calais? Well, because... what are the camps called? What was the name for the camps in Calais? I can't remember. But all the people currently sleeping in tents in the freezing cold would no doubt join the queue of people who are allowed to apply for visas. Oh, sorry, you can't prove that you're not Ukrainian, you can't come in. But my country's being bombed as well. Germany took in 1.6 million. I just have family in London, so I'd really love to go there. 11:19 is the time. Strange one. There may well be a question, and I beg your pardon, an answer to that question, but the detail of it eludes me currently. 19 minutes after 11. Some breaking news for you. Shell has announced plans to withdraw from Russian oil and gas and close all its service stations in the country. This follows fast upon the boss of the FTSE 100 company apologising for buying Russian crude oil at a knockdown price last week. So they're going to stop buying Russian crude oil on the spot market, and not renew term contracts. So depending on how long those contracts are, that will determine how swinging this decision is. It would also change its crude oil supply chain to remove Russian supplies. And just to give you an idea of it being very hard to see the world in binary terms, Joe Biden is reportedly lobbying Saudi Arabia and other Gulf countries to increase their oil production in order to address the rocketing price rises caused by the Russian situation. So that's Shell shutting all its service stations, aviation fuels and lubricants operations in Russia, and starting a phased withdrawal from Russian petroleum products, pipeline gas and liquefied natural gas. I mentioned earlier the company is still trading in Russia. The Daily Mirror singles out McDonald's for criticism. Some companies have elected to do the right thing. Some companies have not. I think Apple and Visa are pausing trade in Russia. We may get onto that a little later, but the appetite for talking about what we're talking about is still considerable. 21 minutes after 11 is the time. Helen has been in touch, says, "You're pathetic, James, trying to make everything negative. Try speaking with the information we have instead of your constant Boris bashing, which is so tiring." And that is what a cult member sounds like. That is what somebody who has been calling for precisely these sort of policies to be introduced because they've had their brains boiled by right-wing media. But to Helen's credit, she's got just enough common sense left to realise how awful it's making her feel, but she's going to take it out on me or you rather than look herself in the eye in the mirror and acknowledge what's been done to her by Boris Johnson and his mates. A government, a Home Secretary, an entire Vote Leave cabal in Downing Street building precisely the policy platforms that they were told people like Helen wanted. And now they're seeing it in glorious technicolor, international humiliation, epic, unparalleled shame on the world stage, and they're hating it. And they can't find the receipt, can't take it back to the vendor. So you're going to try and shoot the messenger. Well, keep shooting, Helen. I'm going nowhere. 22 minutes after 11 is the time. Sukdip is in Keighley, up near Leeds. Sukdip, what would you like to say?
Hi.
Hello.
Yeah. I think one of the main reasons why the government is finding it difficult to pivot away from its anti-refugee stance is because they've spent so much time and effort demonising them, and it's part of a wider issue, I think, which you allude to quite a lot on your programmes. It's not you, it's them.
Yeah.
The problem with public services isn't chronic underfunding, poor workforce planning and, rubbish conditions, working conditions and management.
Sure.
It's the people who aren't like you who are abusing the system.
The lazy people, the lead swingers, the skivers.
Exactly.
I remember this in the firefighters' strike years and years ago. I couldn't believe my ears. I was so green and wet behind them. But all the firefighters being described essentially as kind of lead swinging skivers who lived in Ibiza and drove taxis all day long when popped in occasionally to the fire station to punch their card. So you're right. It's not just with race and ethnicity, is it? It's always.
I mean, it's easier to demonise immigrants and foreigners, I think, than any other part of society. But yeah, absolutely. In the social security system, I should say, it's benefit scroungers, lead swingers. Yeah. In the health system, it's health tourists, immigrants, and time wasters. Yeah. In
you saw people who were working from home during the lockdown got targets painted on their backsides, which I still struggle fully to understand.
And in the criminal justice system, it's the criminals. It's much easier to put vote for higher sentences for these horrible crimes and than actually fix the police system, fix the justice system,
yes,
which now takes so long to grind through. And so I think the government would find it an and then when you have a situation like this, which shows that it's patently untrue, it's a situation of the emperor's new clothes, and
you can't admit that there aren't any. You just can't admit it. You can't admit it
because they're going to have to go back. The government, the Tories, we are going to have to go back. They've got no choice but to go back to those narratives of demonising other people.
But when will that kick in? Because it's not working, is it, at the moment? They're not even trying it. I think they daren't try it for reasons that we've examined. But when might it kick in? When might it return? Will it ever return? Will they start talking about Ukrainians like they talk about Syrians or Afghans?
I think... I truly hope... I truly hope that with the current situation in Ukraine, this will be a change moment for the UK, and we go, okay, refugees aren't scroungers. We should be welcoming them. We should be, looking after them and enabling them to work and build a life with their families.
And then what is the point of Priti Patel? Then what is the point of Priti Patel?
How can they do anything other than what they're doing at the moment?
That's the bit that's missing, isn't it? I think this is the only corner of I'm being a bit self-aggrandising now, but hey-ho, you're used to it by now. I haven't seen anyone else pointing this out yet in the British media. This is not a shock or a surprise or an accident or a mistake. This is absolutely what it was designed to do. And that, of course, the more you focus upon it and the more you shed this naive desire to come up with more sophisticated or nuanced applications, the clearer it becomes. Why can't they do more? Because this is what it was designed to do. Why can't they open visa processing centres in Calais? Because the jungle will empty of all the people fleeing war and abandonment in Syria and Afghanistan will be queuing up alongside the Ukrainians. How's that going to look on the television cameras? It's incredibly simple, perhaps, I don't know. Another example, given that Priti Patel is all over the news at the moment, of something very rotten in the state of our country. The former Commons Speaker, John Bercow, has been banned from holding a House of Commons pass as an ex-MP after a bullying inquiry into his treatment of 3 staff members. Priti Patel, of course, was found to have bullied staff in the Home Office in a report delivered to Boris Johnson by his own independent advisor on standards, and Boris Johnson completely ignored it. So, listen, you can either be in favour of John Bercow having his pass removed, or you can think that he should have been treated like Priti Patel. Listen, that you treat them both the same. Even if you're going to be consistently corrupt and you let 2 proven bullies off the hook because of whatever, but to let your own one off the hook, your own bully off the hook, and a bully from the other side, because although, of course, he was a Conservative MP, John Bercow was, that way, he made a number of high-profile stands against the government's use of Brexit legislation, allowing a number of unorthodox challenges by MPs, but he has been found to be a bully by an independent inquiry, and so was Priti Patel. So how can one of them be Home Secretary while one of them is banned from ever going into the House of Commons again? Do you want to have a go at answering that? On 0345 6060 973? Priti Patel, found to have bullied colleagues, remains in post as Home Secretary. Bloke who did independent inquiry resigns in disgust. Boris Johnson throws the report in the shredder. John Bercow, found to be a bully, found to have bullied colleagues by an independent inquiry. He has been banned from holding a House of Commons pass. She doesn't even lose her job. He loses his access to the entire House of Commons, where, of course, he used to actually live. I mean, is there a more powerful phrase than double standards? Double standards, hypocrisy? They feel a little inadequate to me this morning. She's Home Secretary. He's banned from the premises. Well, what did they do? They were both found to have bullied colleagues. There must be more to it than that. No. This is Boris Johnson's Britain. And my correspondent earlier, Helen, she loves it, thinks we should stop bashing him. Just think about it, all right? If you were groomed into hating John Bercow, right, that's fine. I get it. But you've been robbed today of any righteousness in response to the findings of his bullying inquiry, because Boris Johnson has already proved that he doesn't actually care about people being found to be bullies. So obviously the decision on this occasion is taken by Catherine Stone, as opposed to by the Prime Minister. But the point is this: you don't get to celebrate or do a little bit of Schadenfreude about John Bercow's humiliation unless you remain disgusted to your fingertips by Priti Patel's humiliation, resulting in no sanction or punishment whatsoever. Sometimes I think it's you point this stuff out. Sometimes it feels like you're on one of those Ant and Dec prank shows. There's so much evidence. It's a bit like if you were in an arcade and you were playing one of those push the penny games, you know, and they'd rigged it so that it just started spewing money out all the time. Everywhere you turn, there's money coming out of these orifices, and you're sort of going nuts, and you're trying to grab buckets and stuff like. The evidence of how rotten this lot are it's so huge now. It's incredible because, look, of course, if John Bercow's been found to have bullied staff members by an independent inquiry, and then it's been upheld by an independent expert panel, of course he should be punished. But the question anybody honest would now be asking is, why the hell is Priti Patel still Home Secretary? He's hardly kept her in the job because she's doing she's playing such a blinder. Oh dear. A few more calls on this question of what everyone is complaining about with regard to Priti Patel. Don't worry, this isn't some sort of rearguard action or the slow formation of the Priti Patel fan club. It's just pointing out that if you were her, you probably wouldn't sleep at night. No, I'm joking. If you were her, you'd best avoid garlic and crucifix. No, I'm joking. If you were her, you would probably be a bit confused today about why everyone's so cross with you. Because you've made it almost impossible for refugees to get into this country. And now the proof is in the pudding, the Ukrainian pudding. And everyone, including really unprecedentedly high levels of public support, everyone is against it. You can see her sitting there going, but I've done what they wanted. So how come? What's the pivot? Why are people who demanded this sort of regime, this sort of environment, now complaining about it so vociferously and so publicly and so completely, pant-wettingly, hypocritically? And I think perhaps we have stumbled across something there with my correspondent's help, the idea that they can't do much in Calais because of the jungle, it was called. I couldn't remember what it was called earlier. They can't do much in Calais to help these poor people because of all the other poor people who the British public, or the majority of the British public, currently don't feel sorry for or don't feel any responsibility towards, even though they've fled similar situations in Syria, Afghanistan and elsewhere. So you can't open up a visa application centre in Calais. Otherwise they'd have done it years ago. If they were serious about processing applications in good faith, they could have opened one years ago. But they haven't, which means they probably won't. 11:36 is the time. Daria is in Horsley in Surrey. Daria, what would you like to say?
Oh, hello. Thank you. I'm a little bit nervous. I just wanted to, basically the point that I think we're kind of skirting around is that the vast majority of Brexit voters who were brainwashed into voting Leave by this demonisation of refugees and the idea that immigration was, the most terrible thing that could ever happen to the country. Yes. They didn't realise that the word refugee doesn't mean brown person, and that now they're seeing refugees that reflect themselves almost. They're very, very confused. And they, there's...
I think it is that simple.
Well, in my opinion, yes, there's probably, it's very nuanced. You get a lot of... I have, challenged people on this.
Of course.
And they've said that it's more to do with the geopolitical situation, with it being closer to us geographically, and also the potential for, further war that would affect us. But then, okay, fine. I feel that that's a point. I don't think it's a particularly
funny though, isn't it? When
point.
But you just reminded me. So we would bear some responsibility for refugees coming out of places like Iraq or Syria. I mean, literally as a country, we would bear responsibility. It's bombs that we dropped or paid for.
Yeah, absolutely.
That they're running away from. Whereas this, so we've got less responsibility to refugees we created than we have to.
Point.
It's
this
mad.
has nothing to do with us.
No,
not to minimise the situation in Ukraine, obviously. But I feel like all of the other global crises and the refugee crisis that's been going on for, almost 10 years now with the camps in Calais.
Yeah.
that's a thing too. And I think that it's, the media and, the Leave campaign and everything just portrayed refugees to just be brown people from the Middle East. And
that's what they can't climb down from. That in a way is what she's...
They can't get their head around it. I mean, and I think, back to what
she's hamstrung by this, or gammon-strung, if you prefer.
Back to what I said about people saying that, it's closer to us, it could potentially affect us. That's a point. I don't think it's a particularly good point. My husband actually articulated it really well the other night when we were talking about it. He said, what, are you telling me that if there was a war in Australia, we wouldn't take the Australian refugees? Because they're white.
I do,
like us.
No, I like that. I speak English as well. I mean, and they've got Rupert Murdoch-owned media as well, which would no doubt ease the passage into this country completely.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you've seen any of the little clips of news presenters and people saying things like, they're just like us. They're not like a refugee from Syria.
I haven't seen that in such stark terms, but
there's been a few. I mean, possibly American more than UK reporting, but saying things like people literally saying they're white Christians.
Well, the rhetoric of the Muslim ban assumes an even more sinister demeanour than it had already, doesn't it? This idea of literally indoctrinating people with the idea that there is a hierarchy of humanity and that people that sit here in the hierarchy of humanity deserve your help and the people who sit here don't. I'm enjoying my text off idiots today, so I'll read another one as a counterbalance to the quality of Daria's contribution. This one's unsigned. If James O'Brien had his way, he would open the floodgates of Calais, let everybody in and compensate the people traffickers for their loss of business. Absolute idiot. No, what I said you would do is process every application fairly. And the United Kingdom there could take its share of the global responsibility for the refugee crisis. Because at the moment, anonymous idiot, we don't. We do less per capita than pretty much all of our major European neighbours and comparable economies. So again, it's not your fault that you've ended up bleating ignorantly into the ether on your phone, on your text message. You've been pushed into a position of having to desperately search for a reason why you're not the mug here. Why the stuff you wanted, now it is happening, and you feel disgusting and really stupid and ashamed. It's not my fault, mate. It's partly your fault. Say 48% your fault, 52% the fault of the politicians and the pundits that you listen to. Chris is in Chatham. We spoke yesterday, I think, Chris.
We did indeed, James.
You had family who'd got to Prague. Was it your sister-in-law?
It's my sister-in-law. The situation is that the booking system for getting the biometric sorted out for the visas is outsourced. It's been outsourced for many, many years to an organisation.
By the Foreign Office or by the Czech Republic?
By the UK Border Agency.
By the UK Border Agency.
That's for all countries, as far as I'm aware.
Right.
And the office in Prague is open from 9 in the morning until 1:20 in the afternoon.
Right.
Monday to Friday. That's it.
Right.
And
that hasn't changed in the context of the current crisis. It's on normal hours, is it?
No.
Okay.
No, the government website is still saying the Lviv processing centre is open, but it's been closed. It's saying it's open for walk-ins, but it's not. It's closed.
Okay.
The Prague website for booking the appointment has a notice just simply saying no service. And when I spoke to the UK Border Agency, they said, you'll just have to keep on trying until you get through, because there's so many applications. And according to the website record, there's potentially no available slots until the middle of April.
So what's going to happen to your sister-in-law?
I don't know. They're going to have to rely on
the kindness of strangers?
Charity.
In Prague?
Yeah.
So that she's... Is it just her, or has she got children? Remind me. Sorry, Chris.
No,
I spoke to so many people yesterday.
It's just her that's travelling.
Yeah, so she's stuck in Prague. She's successfully got to Prague, and she doesn't
she's on the way to Prague at the moment.
Okay, and when she gets there, the earliest she can expect to have her visa application accepted is the middle of April.
potentially, that's assuming that we're able to get onto the system to be able to book her appointment.
So when you say potentially, you mean at the earliest?
At the earliest,
and the system has currently crashed?
And the system's currently crashed.
And what are you doing? Refreshing every 10 minutes, trying to do it on her behalf, or?
Yeah. Every time you're getting on there to try and make the appointment, it's just no service. There's no message that says normal service will be resumed in 2 hours, or we're working on it. It just says no service, and that is the response.
Where's the line? Forgive me for this slightly glib question, given the severity of the situation you're in, or you're trying to help your sister-in-law out of. Where's the line between deliberate and accidental incompetence, do you think?
That's a very, very good question.
That's what I do, Chris.
Indeed, yeah. I mean, my view is if you had somebody like Ticketmaster or Keith Prowse dealing with this, and they deal with thousands and thousands of applications for tickets across the country every day, dealing with, what is it now, 18,000, they say they've now got 18,000 applications for family visas.
2 million refugees, that's just the United Kingdom's contribution to the horrors.
That's right. And and
they can't cope.
System,
they can't cope.
No, and this system is just basically making an appointment in the diary. So it's just like switching on Outlook and choosing a date. And apparently the system can't cope with that.
Well, good luck. And as I said yesterday, she's lucky to have someone batting for her from this side of the channel, because there'll be a lot of people who don't. Quick correction from me. Apparently, I never knew this. You live and learn. 50 years old and still learning. You don't say the proof of the pudding. You say the proof of the pudding is in the eating. Oh, yeah, now you mention it, that does make a lot more sense, doesn't it? That's in the proof of the pudding. So I do, Billy and Bawtry, many others, keen that I correct that immediately on air. It's good to see you got your priorities sorted, lads. But I'm only teasing, because we need a little bit of light, don't we, when we're discussing so much shade. And speaking of shade, I've got a great guest for you after this, who is going to give us a really helpful insight into the military situation, the continuing, and if you prefer, the escalating military situation. He's an academic at St Andrews University called Phillips O'Brien, and I can't wait to talk to him, and I've got a feeling you'll enjoy it too. We veer away from the conversation we've been having thus far. I've said to you for some time now, this whole sorry saga, however long it lasts, from a British perspective, is going to break down into three sort of key areas: arms, sanctions, refugees. And we return to the military side of proceedings in Ukraine now, in the company of Phillips O'Brien, who is a professor of strategic studies at the University of St Andrews, and who has written an excellent comment piece in today's Times, which, well, strikes, in a sense, and in the context of the unfolding tragedy, quite an optimistic note. Not least, Phil, because the warnings or the fears of an epic Russian war machine not only appeared to be unfounded, but it wasn't a reading that you had personally signed up to in the first place, I don't think.
Well, I mean, look, the Russian war machine is formidable in the fact that it can blow a lot of things up. It has enormous firepower. It can be extremely destructive. But what it has never actually been asked to do since at least the end of the Cold War, and in many ways since the end of the Second World War, we could say, is operate a mass war with a lot of complex systems. That's a really difficult thing to do. And this military will have had no experience of doing that. So we were sort of, I think, assuming, they have all these big weapons and they're very strong and they can blow things up. They'll know how to use them properly. But actually, war is a real disaster. And it stresses a system more than you can imagine. And and by the way, this is one of the first wars where people have fired back at them.
Yes.
Yeah. So from what we can tell, they went into the war with I think a very overly optimistic view of the kind of resistance they would get from the Ukrainians. Definitely an overestimation, I think, on how long it would take them to fulfill their objectives. And they behaved in such a way to begin with that led them into a lot of logistic problems, most famously the 40-mile column. But it's now the question is, can they recover? The original strategy was gone. It's done.
This was the 48 hours to take Kiev, install a puppet regime, and everybody goes back to how they were before, and as you were. Business as usual gets resumed. That's failed. Before we move on to what the next stage will look like, I mean, I can understand me being surprised by the situation you've just described. I can't fully understand them being so surprised by it. It's as if they thought they were playing Risk and they could just pick up armies. And they forgot about the logistics of running them and supplying them and keeping them moving. They just thought by sheer scale of force, if we move this from here to here will crumble beneath our boots. Is it that naive?
Well, it's more, I think, the system of a dictatorship in action.
Ah, okay, yes.
Dictatorships play, they fall prey to what I'll call the echo chamber phenomenon.
No one's going to tell him. I'm not going to tell him. Are you going to tell him?
Well, exactly. First of all, no one's going to contradict you.
Right.
And give you advice you don't want to hear. Moreover, they're then going to confirm or reinforce your bad ideas. So they don't tell you the truth, and they make your nutty ideas seem far more plausible because they're trying to court favor in your court, and Putin controls the strings. So it is clear. I think the most telling example of that was that extraordinary televised humiliation session that he made his advisors go through to confirm the strategy. That was not Putin wanting advice or having an honest discussion. That was him making the most powerful people in the country grovel and agree to something he wanted to do, even when they didn't want to.
Sure, and we saw evidence of that, didn't we, in that surreal Security Council meeting?
That's what I saw. That was absolutely right.
And the subsequent dismissal of one of the people who had the audacity to just look slightly disgruntled at a later televised encounter. So what happens next then? So as you explain it, an unexpected, from his point of view, failure of Phase 1. We've seen remarkable footage of what looked to be sort of fourth-hand minivans being trucked to the front on the back of railway carts. What will the next phase look like, or what is it supposed to look like?
They've got three broad options, one would say. The second is to continue to reinforce failure. If they want to take over, I think Putin began this with what we'll call maximalist goals, which is to take over Ukraine. Take over Ukraine, subsume it into Russia, and start recreating in many ways as much of the old Soviet Union as possible, certainly as much of old Imperial Russia as possible. Now, could he do that? Well, probably with this army he has now, he couldn't take over all of Ukraine. He would probably be able to get a lot of southern and eastern Ukraine, maybe half of it, but he's now got every troop that he originally deployed across the border. Not all of them a lot of them have not seen combat yet, but they're in the country. And that army would probably suffer a lot to take over all of eastern Ukraine. Would it be Kiev, Kharkov? So if he's going to try and take over the whole country, it really is another major army sent in, which would be extraordinarily risky and dangerous and exhausting. So that's one. The other two options are the rolling back demands or the annexation. Let's try and take as much of southern and eastern Ukraine as we can.
Saw a bit of that yesterday, did we, with the offer, so-called offer?
Well, that was even below that.
Yeah.
The offer was basically, and we have no idea whether that's genuine, the offer was Crimea recognition, Donbass and Luhansk independence or self-rule, and a pledge not to join NATO. But I'm talking more a larger annexation along the coast of the Black Sea and a lot of eastern Ukraine. The problem with that, and they might be able to take those territories now with the army they have. They could blow a lot of things up with a lot of firepower and take it. But then they're left with the problem of, by doing that, one, Ukrainian nationalism is still there. The people have the identity. The Ukrainian army is still in the field, so they have a permanent war, and their economy is tanking. These sanctions are far worse. So that just seems to me an example of permanent war, and you're setting your economy into collapse. The last one, which hopefully they might take at some point, is a negotiated settlement out.
What might that look like?
I think actually the fascinating thing is we don't know what Ukraine would want.
Sure. You mean what they would consider worth paying for peace?
I mean, would they, would Ukraine be willing to give up EU or EU membership?
Or NATO ambitions?
Yeah. Would they be willing to sign away Crimea? Well, who knows? Maybe they would be able to do that. But, it would be very hard for them to make a lot of concessions and across the board, considering how their army has fought and how their population is now enraged. So finding that political middle ground for a compromise might not be that easy.
And meanwhile, a tidal wave, if you like, of NATO and, as you describe it, some non-NATO anti-tank and anti-air missiles are pouring into Ukraine. That's significant as well.
Yeah, huge numbers, maybe in some ways more than they can use in the short term. And they're going to have their own logistical problems now distributing those. I mean, they're going to have a real trouble getting, particularly East Ukraine, which is a real mess, to try and get all this equipment out. If they can get a large percentage of it out and put it in the hands of soldiers that can be used, this presents a huge problem to Russia. I mean, 17,000 anti-tank and anti-air missiles, say even only 10% of those are effective. That's 1,700 vehicles and aircraft taken out. That's a huge, that's just from those weapons, let alone. Now, 10% is a pretty small percentage of them being effective. So I think that presents a huge challenge to Russia, but it's more of a logistic one now for the Ukrainians.
And the priority would be fuel trucks.
Well, certainly that seems to have been a problem that the Russians had early in the war. Was that they have very heavy tanks. They have fuel guzzling equipment, and fuel is in many ways the most direct way to immobilize an enemy. Without fuel, you're not going anywhere. If you take out a truck, you're never quite sure what's in it, but if you take out a fuel truck, you know what it is. So it makes a fuel truck, I think, a pretty sensible target if what you want to do is immobilize an army invading you.
Phillips O'Brien, thank you. I enjoyed your piece enormously today in the Times, and you've added to my understanding of the situation in this conversation, for which everybody listening will be grateful. Phillips, as I mentioned, is a professor of strategic studies at the University of St Andrews.